On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Dennis Mortensen. He is the CEO and co-founder of LaunchBrightly. This is actually Dennis's second time on the podcast. He was actually guest number one, so I'm super excited to have him back on the show. We're going to be talking about entrepreneurial mindset. Dennis is a serial entrepreneur, serial exits. He's got a lot of ideas, and I think we're going to take some twists and turns on this journey. Dennis, thank you for coming back onto the show.
Thanks much for having me. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely. All right, catch us up. I know. Last time I chatted with you, your project was X.ai. Tell us what happened there, and what are you working on now?
The short story is that me and my buddies spent half a decade trying to assemble this intelligent agent that could schedule meetings on your behalf. X.ai, pre-current AI hype. It was an awesome domain, though, and got the agent to work quite well. Actually, so well that we're able to assemble this exit in 2021. Side note, you can never really sell your company when you want to sell it. You can only sell it when you want to keep it, which is a kind of very odd dichotomy, right? For where last quarter, last month, last week were best week ever on all the metrics that we cared about. Money, meetings, what have you. And in that moment, had it not been for the offer, I think I would have kept it, but did sell it. Then, as an interesting piece of trivia, some months later, Mr. Musk bought the domain for his endeavors, and probably all good and fine. I'm not attached to that circus. Now, since then, brought the team back together, are now working on this idea of automating the product screenshots process. So you run a piece of software, you have a help center or knowledge base in place, 300 some odd articles, a couple of screenshots in each, those 600, 700, 800 some images, all of them, I will guarantee you today, if you go look at them, are crafted manually. Walk into a demo account, find the right page, find the right feature, put it in the right state, do a little bit of inspect element, Command Shift 4, take a screenshot, massage it a little bit with some annotation, some styling, what have you, go into Zendesk, replace the image in the right articles. And again, nothing hard about this, just another little chore for where, damn, do I need to do this 800 times? What, once a quarter, once a year? Well, you kind of need to do it whenever engineering updates the product, so you're not out of sync with reality, because the product obviously is reality. And today, though, we finally reached this kind of moment where we have almost max engineering velocity. As in, there was a time, you and me being old enough to remember, that we would push to production once a quarter. Those days are over. The most junior engineer will push something today at 2:00, a little change to a button and what have you, because we can. Now, if there's 20 changes a day, how do you then keep up to date? You can't. We built this automation software. You should almost think of it as Zapier or Zapier-like, which is that you create these recipes, which we can then re-execute in any mode. We spin up these browsers in the cloud, put it into the right state. Oh, you want a screenshot of this feature in dark mode, mobile, German. Well, I'll do that every night for you, find the articles that exist in and replace it. So that's us, like super kind of niche, like just one of those little pains for where I know exactly who has that pain, they know who I am, and on May 8th, God willing, good karma and everything else, we'll launch version 1.
Well, I think when the first time we spoke, you talked to us about how you go through and look at ideas, you keep track of them, you come back to them. Out of curiosity, because if somebody has listened to episode 1 and wants to kind of piece the two together as a bridge, this idea itself, how was this born?
Same methodology, which is that, and just as a side note, I won't bore you with the same story, but at least I'm consistent, which is that I don't do personally anything when I do my ventures. I don't angel invest. I don't sit on advisory boards or 100 other things. I only do my venture so that if I lose, at least I can tell myself, well, I played the best game I could. It just wasn't today. Fun game, but it wasn't today. If I win, well, I can take a little bit of credit because I applied all my efforts. I didn't stumble into it. I applied all my efforts. But like any other entrepreneur, you have ideas all the time. As in, you don't have to be really a full-time entrepreneur. You can have a great job in a great place. You'll spot little things in the universe that feel wrong or are wrong, and you think about them for a little bit. And so do I. What I do though is I don't pursue them. I immediately pull them out of my head, add them to a list. I call it my little list of hate. I don't add any good ideas. I only add things which I hate, things that are broken. And then I just go about my life, and then I get to some sort of exit in some form. We die, or we get a few extra monies in our pocket. At that moment, I go back to my list, and that is a fun exercise. Because what you have is a 5-year little daily journal of one angry boy, of things that just didn't work. Plenty of them are just little silly things where, Dennis, that's not a real pain. Man up. That's just how things work. Other things are that is a pain. Why didn't people solve that? Or why is that not solved yet? A few people kind of tried and stumbled. Let me kind of go investigate. This particular one of, hey, go and massage the right screenshots into place into that help center. As a founder, if you started anything in a kind of 0-1 setting, you've done that yourself. I've done enough Command-Shift-4 to take screenshots to add that to the list saying, why am I sitting here at 10 p.m. in my underwear with a Diet Coke taking screenshots in a firm where we raised tens of millions of dollars? Like, is this it? That's not how I imagined it, but that's how it is. So it ended up on that list. I have a whole kind of qualification process, which we don't need to talk about, but it was on that list, and I pulled it out from that, and then slowly kind of validated it, and it ended up being the one to pursue. And here we are, about a year plus into it, just, as I said, inches short of launching that first version.
Very cool, man. Very cool. You touched on something interesting. You said you don't spend time as an advisor, you don't angel invest, you focus on your business. That way you're accountable for the results. There's no, I was distracted. Before we started recording, we were talking about being an entrepreneur as a game. And I guess in that context, if you're not distracted by anything outside of the core game you're playing, you kind of then, at least to your words, you know where you stand within your capabilities, within your dynamics. When we look at the game of entrepreneurship, I kind of mentioned to you, each product, each project, whatever we want to call it, is its own instance of a game. The rules change. There are no rules. The game is undefined. There's a lot of undefined components. How do you view, I guess, is that a fair view of being an entrepreneur and a startup, or are there rules within that game that maybe we just don't see?
I like the idea, or I like the map you put in place. I would like to kind of differentiate between rules and skills. And I do think the rules are mostly unknown. Yes, some will rhyme a little bit. It's probably going to be that Delaware C Corp next time as well. But that's a little silly thing. And there's many little silly things you'll just do that are probably not of much value. You'll learn those rules. But most of the real rules that matter are unknown. That doesn't mean that you can't carry over a set of skills which you picked up. As in, most good people in sport might not win a medal in another sport, but they might take a set of skills that will allow them to be way better than the amateur. As in, if you do the 5K, you could probably do a pretty good marathon. As in, I've assembled a set of skills for how you train for a good run. I'm really a 5K runner. I'll rearrange some of my skills to do a marathon or many other things. And I do think that you can carry over. And those skills can increase the probability of success ever so slightly, but you don't come in completely unprepared. You're kind of conditioned to a battle for where, okay, I know that there's plenty of unknowns here, but I got my hands up because that's a skill I picked up along the way.
You know, I actually 100% agree. And again, I think when we were talking before we hit the record button, I said it's no accident that you are a serial entrepreneur with serial exits. There is a learned skill there. And you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. Most people, as they're growing up, through a lot of portions of their lives, we're always working towards a predefined success parameter. Go to high school, take the right tests, go to the right college, go through all these milestones that we feel are established for us and we're working towards them. And you get a lot of entrepreneurs, younger ones, older ones, that have really never been in a situation where the rules of the game are undefined and they're not working towards a known parameter. When you kind of look at yourself and kind of maybe look outside and see the broader scape of startups and just entrepreneurs, doesn't have to be tech even, that component of not having a predefined benchmark, obviously we can define, I want to make $1 million in revenue. That's not what we're talking about here, because the game is potentially undefined even when you start. How do you kind of differentiate that?
I think there's many ways we can choose to look at this. The way I choose to look at it is that you somehow need to do it for the love of the sport. As in, the journey itself is the reward. As in, this is my life. And if my life, as I'm executing on it in this very moment, isn't fun, exciting, fulfilling, then there's no amount of medals and prizes and money in the end that can make up for that. I do think, though, when I speak to people randomly, like you do, around town, that plenty of folks, and a good little indicator is that if they've done one startup and one startup only, it might not have worked. And I actually think, side note, as you said before, you can think of them almost as experiments. They're not supposed to work. As in, the default outcome is that you die a sudden, instant death. And that is okay. It was just an experiment. Some will, through some form of miracle, get to the other side and barely be alive, but with a little bit of extra effort, you can kind of keep them alive for just long enough to kind of see them kind of turn into a little kid. Now, if somehow you only do that one thing or only have your eye on the prize, I find it hard to see how you can overcome just the day in and the day out. And I actually don't think you really can. I actually also think you can almost pick these people out as saying, yes, I did follow all the rules. The rules were known. I did get, I did exactly what I was told. Given I did exactly what I was told, I did get the prize that was promised. And for every step, it was kind of very clear. And it just really hurts when you start this particular game where it looks like I'm doing what I'm supposed to, but I'm not being rewarded. If anything, I might actually be penalized at this very moment. That is beyond frustrating, demoralizing even. And you can see that they might put on a brave face, but then you might not love the sport. Then you working at the bank might just be awesome for you. And you should do just that, where there's just a career ladder and trajectory for where, sure, still some unknowns, but mostly something which you can follow and you'll be rewarded for doing that well. I'm not talking about that be of a lesser profession. It's just a different path where if the unknown set of rules are almost kind of hurtful, you just shouldn't do it. Even when I speak to more mature entrepreneurs who've done it a couple of times, like myself, they might even grow out of the whole 0 to 1. I fucking love the whole 0 to 1. Like no tech, buggy tech, half features, half baked, no customers, no money, no prospects, no marketing, no inbound, nothing. Like, but there's an inkling. We can nurture it, but slowly but surely. That part, this last kind of 14 months, which I spent in the basement, alone in the dark with 5 buddies, I find it romantic, like joyful. And it doesn't take much to say, 2 hours before this, I had a demo with a possible lead, post kind of launching that version 1, might not work out, doesn't matter. But the joy that brings me, like, yes, I think we had like 9 out of the 10 features that they kind of asked for, I think we kind of executed on it exactly as she would have imagined. Like, oh, that is just awesome. Again, that I think is, there's plenty of me, by the way, but that is somebody for where, do it for the love of the sport. And here's another picture. Same story. Might be an even better analogy. So any VC fund in its kind of traditional sense will raise a sum of money, pick a number of years, 3-4 years, invest that into a host of companies, keep a few extra kind of monies to kind of pile on later, expect almost all of them to kind of go tits up. 1 or 2 might go sideways. 1 will win, pay for the whole kind of party. Like very kind of standard. And that's cool. But that suggests in their funnel where, well, they've only even at the top invested in things where they thought that had some chance of potential kind of success. That's a much wider. We looked at 1,000 to get to 20, to get to 1 winner or some version of that. Then it seems almost naive to believe that Emir and Dennis walks into a basement on their first startup and imagines that that's going to work out. Well, as in, if we're that good, we should probably we should pick startups. Like, we're that good. So we're probably not. So since we can't run these in parallel, we should probably run them in serial, meaning that you and me should probably think of this as the 50-year fund, which is that over a lifetime, which is why you have to do it for the love of the sport. We can do what? 7, 8, 9, perhaps 10 ventures. I'm on number 6, coming up short of 30 years. That's what I'm able to do up until this point. But it's really a 50-year fund. That's how I think about it. And if you do something for 50 years, you can't do it for the bigger apartment or the bigger whatever. You have to do it because that was 50 years well spent.
You know, I want to follow up on something you mentioned. The emotional side of being an entrepreneur, being a startup, things that are unknown. Humans in general don't like the unknown. We run from it. A lot of people, flight or fight. We typically flight. We don't want to fight because it's an unknown. That's part of our reptilian brain. I get that. When we talk about for the love of the sport, being an entrepreneur, I mentioned to you before, every time we've talked, every time I have interaction with you, always seem happy. But you said, interestingly, you do have moments that obviously bother you, right? You can't always be happy. It's a state, an emotional state. When we're talking about an entrepreneur and we're talking about that journey, that up and down roller coaster, I feel a lot of times entrepreneurs take that emotional state on internally. And it's hard because the buck stops with them. How do you, and this is a big question. I mean, we can break it up, but obviously managing that emotional state and keeping focus for the love of the sport, those are 2 things that maybe don't work well together, especially for a lot of people.
I'll provide a defense if you challenge me. I try to separate, like any good sportsman, you should be disappointed if you set out to execute on some plan to reach some goal, you don't reach the goal. You should be disappointed saying, hey, I worked 8 months to get into the Olympics in Paris, or I worked 4 years to get into the Olympics, or I worked my whole life to enter Formula One, or whatever your fantasy might be. You should be disappointed. But I think you should separate your self-worth from the kind of sport that you're playing. As in, I might not have won this particular race that I was leaning into. Doesn't make me any less of a human. I'm as valuable today as I were yesterday. Yes, I didn't succeed on this particular goal, but it was, if I loved it, an exciting journey. In the moment for where we didn't get to where we needed to be, yes, I was disappointed, but not sad or depressed, but as in, damn it. Okay, let's take a few notes here. What was it that we did that didn't allow us to kind of see what we had hoped for? Okay, yeah, the next day, we've done a little bit of a reset, we revisit. I'm the same human being. And here's a cheat code. Wouldn't work if you're too young, but I learned that later. By me, this is going to sound rude. It's not. The whole thing is a happy story. But by mistake, I had my kids early. Here's a side note to a side note. Super liberal back home in Scandinavia. My girlfriend would buy the pill for 3 months. I would buy the pill for 3 months. It was my turn. I was working my first startup. Like, I'm a little bit late. Hey, I'm just fucking busy. And she said, hey, but you know how it works, right? If you don't, out comes children. First, I do know how it works. Second, it's not that easy. Tomorrow, I will fix it. And I think I fixed it like 5 days late. And it was too late. And I couldn't even complain to anybody. It was all of my own working. So I had them very early. Okay, back to the original story, which is wonderful where if you can create a setting where you know without any doubt, well, there's 3 girls at home who love me. So whether I close this particular deal or not, or raise these extra $10 or not, or hire this spectacular engineer or not, they're still going to love me. I'm going to lean in. I'm going to be super ambitious. I'm going to be a little bit disappointed in the moment if I didn't succeed on what I had hoped for. They're still going to love me. And if anything, we can pick a particular discipline. If it was something I got really good at, post to having those kids very early on, was sales. As in, you can almost, you can see if some individual salesperson depends on the commission attached to this particular offering. As in, I need to close this, pay rent, and they become a little kind of panicky. Once you've been able to put something in place, which is a constant level of love in your life, I don't need to close shit. And you know what? You sell really well when people can see. I don't think he obviously cares, but he seems like he's so stable that there's something going on in his life that I need to be attached to because he's leaning in, he's hyper biased, obviously think the world of his solution, but there's something there that worked really well. But all the way back to the beginning, I would separate the 2 parts, your self-worth. And I've certainly seen plenty of people where that little Venn diagram, that's become a real overlap, where some failure, especially the kind of spectacular ones for where we even raised some capital, there were some people dependent on me, I might have raised some capital from family and friends, and the whole thing just didn't work. And somehow they're almost kind of overlap, right? And the kind of disappointment turns into, well, I wouldn't call it depression, but certainly a level of disappointment that was just almost hard to escape. Perhaps so hard to escape that I couldn't even do the second one. As in, I couldn't assemble the energy to kind of go out and do a second one. This was it. I did one in my life. I ticked it off. It was on my bucket list. 2 different things. Amir is as good, as awesome, as exciting as he was before or after that particular startup, win or lose.
I love the story. I think it was a fantastic way to kind of put that in context. Two, I guess, separate questions are going to take us maybe slightly away in 2 different directions, but I figured with our time, I wanted to cover these 2. One, you said something interesting. If you don't have the love for the sport, maybe going to get that job and working hard and progressing is not a bad outcome. I also feel we see so much in social media, everyone telling you becoming an entrepreneur is easy, have a side hustle, go start a business, it's better to be your own boss. It is so popularized that I think a lot of people, especially younger demographic who are coming through university, are constantly thinking about how do I start a company versus maybe working for 5-10 years isn't a bad thing. Obviously, your risk levels might change, 2 different ways you might go about it. But the question, I guess, is entrepreneurism has become popularized. It has become glorified. The end outcome being dollars. If you go work for yourself, you'll make money instead of working for someone. Does that help? Or has that helped?
I'm personally a fan of the fact that the idea of becoming an entrepreneur and starting your own thing is not a plan B. It's a very honest, possible plan A, which you can tell your parents with a straight face. Not as in, I did 50 applications, no bite, I think I'm going to do something else. That I like. That should at least allow everybody who really wants it to go out and do it without any possible stigma attached to it. By the way, just as a side note, there's almost no stigma in the US in particular, as in of all the flaws that might come attached to this kind of circus we have going, that is actually one of the winning traits. It is very different. As in, I certainly remember when I grew up, if you suggested you really wanted to be an entrepreneur, people couldn't see it, as in there must be a plan B. As in, what other plan you had must have failed. You're unwilling to kind of tell me what that was, and now you're doing this. Over here, though, I think we probably even crossed that inflection point where that can be your plan A. And that's also just fewer steps between you and somebody who had success. As in, most people over here will have some kind of idea of what success might look like. But I don't mind. I don't even mind if somebody does it and fails. If anything, don't fail so dramatically that you can't come back from it. But most are able to come back from it. As in, you're some engineer who tried to do something, it didn't work out. You can go code somewhere else if you want to. And plenty of other kind of professions within our small ventures. So I don't mind. What I do mind a little bit, or perhaps it's just a pet peeve, is that it focused a little bit too much, kind of coming back to where we started on the prize. You all the free time, all the things you can buy, all the things which you can. Well, perhaps you should talk about the joy of doing it, not of if it's just about the prize. What? Sure, I also want to win the lottery. Hey, tell me more. That I'm missing a little bit, and that's just a pet peeve.
Yeah, and I think that's, what's interesting. What you mentioned is, I think in the States, obviously, entrepreneurship is really grounded. I think we've definitely passed. I think everyone sees, as you mentioned, the prize sometimes, and I think you can see the entrepreneurs that have a bit of that love of the game, that understand. They might have to pivot. They might have to scratch crawl to make it work. And I guess the other question I was going to ask you was in terms of pivoting, because obviously, as an entrepreneur, you're running through walls sometimes, and at some point you might stop and try to run into a different wall to go through. And I guess, pivoting to talk to venture capitalists, and they're like, well, if you pivot too much, that's bad. If you pivot too late, that's bad. But if you're running into a problem and you see a version that's a better evolution of the idea, pivoting is good. I think that notion of pivoting is very complicated. What are your thoughts on when you might pivot, when you should pivot? What should you see before you potentially go, I have to try slightly something different with the same idea?
So I'm full of opinions here, and they might not be the best ideas, but I'm still married to them. So I'll kind of ride this thing to the end. So I'm not a fan of the pivot to survive. There's no reason that your startup should survive. There's a reason to run the initial experiment to end. The end can be successful or not so successful. But if somehow you and me in the late 30s decide to invade Poland, if we are the baddies in this story, and then halfway there, I tell you, you know what? Let's turn left. Let's invade Sweden instead. Then we're not on a mission at all. And in that kind of sad, dramatic analogy for where I need to find a version where we're the positive ones, it just doesn't resonate with me. If you and me set out to remove a pain from the universe, we stick to it. We ride that thing to the end. Now, that is me being unwilling to do a company pivot. As in, hey, we have a little bit of capital left. None of what we worked on is of any interest. Let's do something else, like audio turning into Twitter, if we take the positive version of this. Good on them. I'm just not a fan of that type of pivot at all. That you should have run to an end or have surrendered, saying we've exhausted all of the experiments which we can run. We even have some capital left. We'll return that. We might go play another game with another team. But these people, they were on the kind of podcast mission with us. Why are they on the short messaging social network mission? As in, they can't even be the same people. As in, you got married to one thing, one fight, one battle. Now, just put on another hat, fight another battle. Like, no, cool. That I don't like. Now, on the other pivot, which, again, I just dislike the word so much that I try not to use it, but it probably is a pivot. But it's one for where you should initially have gotten married to a pain so honest that different attack angles will not change the mission. If I set out to remove the pain attached to scheduling or remove the pain attached to manual product screenshots, well, I can have all sorts of tries how to remove that because the pain stays the same. Sometimes the pain isn't either a true pain or rooted in something original, but if it is, and you just keep attacking. If people continue to tell you that, I still have it. Yeah, this try of yours didn't really alleviate or remove it. I'll come back later as long as that is true. So that I like. That I'll continue to do until I've exhausted all my resources and say, well, perhaps some other dude will come along, some other woman will come along, and the 11th experiment, that'll be it. I only had it in me to do 7. That's where we died.
I think that's really awesome because I think that ties back to the level of the sport being focused. You mentioned, not doing angel investing, don't sit on boards, focus on your product. You keep track of those bad things so that one day they are a thesis and baseline for your hypothesis, and you'll continue focusing if that is a real pain. Because I think now that I've listened to you, I almost go, if Dennis didn't get the right pain, that's when the startup dies. If he has the right pain identified, how he solves that pain might evolve, quote unquote, that pivot, but the pain should still be the right pain unless it was just misidentified, in which there isn't an opportunity, in which case the startup dies.
Yeah, and that is okay. We've now proven that, that was actually not a pain. That was a perceived pain or an imagined pain, and we tried to then solve it for only going to figure it out later on. Well, people don't need help doing this. Fair enough. We're now wiser. Cost of 3 years though, but we're now wiser. The world now knows something. We certainly know it as well because we learned it the hard way.
Dennis, last question. I gotta let you. I know you got a ton to do, so I'm gonna ask you one final question out of selfish curiosity. What do you do to keep yourself centered day to day?
We all do many things. I'll give you one thing which I do, which I'm a big fan of. I kind of advocated like I should have some sort of group app going on it, but I do very long walks. So you can sit and meditate, which works very well for some. I've not been able to kind of assemble the setting where it worked for me. I'm sure through more training I could, but what I do is I live on Wall Street. I'll take the subway to the other end of Manhattan. That's 25 some odd kilometers. No phone, no music, no podcast, no nothing. Just kind of my thoughts. Then I walk back. It'll take me 3 hours. I'll burn some calories and get a burger on the other end. But mostly just kind of letting my mind wander. It's almost kind of like hey, I spent the whole week. The whole thing got a little messy. It's time to kind of clean up. We'll do a long walk, put everything into the right boxes, kind of get ready for the week to kind of come. But I don't bring in an agenda. I don't bring anything which I need to solve. I just let the whole thing kind of wander where it takes me. Which could be some odd thing happening on some corner. I think about for the next 5 minutes. I see something. I think about that. Another thing kind of pops up. And I've done that for decades. It turns out to be a good little mini exercise. Come winter, summer, what have you. But you can join me one day if you want. But 3 hours, full scope Manhattan. That's my trick.
All right. I quite like that. Hey, if I am in New York and it coincides with the 3 hour walk, I will let you know. I might impede your walk, but it would be a cool journey to go on. Dennis, thanks for being on again. You're amazing. I appreciate your time. If somebody wants to reach out to you to learn more about the new venture or just to pick your brain on entrepreneurship, what's a good way of getting in touch with you or the company?
Anybody can email me on dennis@launchbrightly.com at any time. Side note, I run inbox zero. So before midnight, you'll have some sort of response, however short or however long, but that's how I run my life on social. I am in most places under the same handle at Dennis Mortensen and tend to be reasonably chatty. While I don't do any advisory, I take walks with entrepreneurs all the time. I have one coming up here at 6:00. Usually we'll do kind of an hour and a half. I have a little kind of circle downtown Manhattan. We'll do 3 kind of circles, kind of come back, which is great. And I don't see that as not being focused. I think that's a great way to kind of get ideas. And here's the thing that I do most. I tend to meet up with, if I could pick, less senior, very early, super wild, kind of like a you call it a bobcat. You try to bring it into the house, like very young entrepreneurs where you're fucking crazy. That's not going to work. If you're alive next week, I'll be surprised, because they'll say things that are just outrageous where, don't save anything, Dennis. Or they'll say something so outrageous that you're thinking, I have to go check that. That is so insane. I'm going to go home. I'm going to check up on that. Like, you're doing something completely different to me, but your particular acquisition attack angle or this particular idea, that can't be. I'm going to go home and do some research here. So that I do all the time. And it's just, splendid time. I have one coming up in exactly an hour and a half.
That's too good. That's too good. Now, to be a fly on the wall of that conversation, but I definitely appreciate it. We'll put your socials in the show notes. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. 2 things. 1, if you're an entrepreneur, you want to get into running your own business, you want to understand what it's going to take. This is a great episode. Share it with somebody else who might be interested. I think Dennis covered a ton of ground. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is doing. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.